Yeah, okay. Basically, there was a lot of things discussed today, and it's going to be quite a challenge to summarize all of these things. But there were some themes that came out pretty clearly. And the first one, of course, is collaboration. We've heard that all day long, but that's a key thing. And we're going to do something about that. We're going to go after this meeting and see the ones who organized this session, see if there are things that we can do together. This will be a separate thing downstream. The other thing that I saw here, and most of you did, is there was a lot of discussions about economics and the difficulty that we're in right now, and it really affects this technology a great deal. Several, suggestions were made about how to bridge that gap, but basically, collaboration seemed to be one of the major ways of being able to handle this economy that we're in. And importantly, I think that the attitude of both government and industry right now, because of the economics, is a 2-year payback, basically. Any R&D project is only justified by a 2-year payback, mostly. And so that limits a lot of the investment that people have. Nevertheless, we feel that there is really a bright future moving ahead here. Now, just to go back to some of the panels, let's just go back to panel 1 and discuss a little bit about what came out of this session. The first is that in terms of immediate power applications, it seems that fault current limiters and SMEs appeared to be on the horizon. At least there's a lot of activity there. I'm not sure that the products are there yet, but the activity level is very high, and especially in New York State. And that followed by some wind turbine interest in terms of putting, superconductivity in wind turbines. A lot of this is driven, the fault current limiting stuff is driven by, apparently, the fluctuations in the grid caused by renewables, maybe electric cars, things of that nature, which I thought was very interesting. There was also a lot of discussion about the need for proving things. And I find that very interesting because a lot of things have been proven, and there's a lot of data out there, as people suggested. I don't know if it's thoroughly digested yet, and especially what's going on in other countries. But there's a constant need for data. And I think that's just symptomatic of the fact that people are trying to find how to keep things going, keep people active, without really investing hard in it. And because that's a very difficult thing to do, to justify, to sell. And so the more data you can get, the easier it is to kind of get some money and keep going. But quite often I notice that more data is usually an excuse of there's no money yet, and just wait. But hopefully this will, in time, resolve itself. The other thing that I noticed in the first panel was that the conductor is still the king. In other words, it's the one, particularly the HTS conductor, it's the one that, is the barrier right now in terms of cost. It's always a cost issue. But nevertheless, any improvement there makes this, these devices better as we go forward. The other thing that I noticed, or I should say I heard, was that we have the oldest grid in this nice state, which is not surprising since Edison did and Tesla were here to start it off. I know that pretty well because in the little town that I live in, Bird Hills, or Balsam Lake, there was a power outage, and I went to the National Grid people and said, what happened? They said a 1912 underground cable was cut. And that led me to think, why aren't all the cables underground? And every time the wind blows, we have a lot of trucks coming in from Montana to repair them. And there are reasons for that. I won't go into that now, but just indicating that there is a slow change in this industry, that the correct infrastructure has to be built up. Moving on to panel 2, there was a lot of discussions about the new computing that's coming. In particular, the quantum computing, which is very fascinating and could really revolutionize how we do everything. But it's 15 years away and needs support. Importantly, Mike Fancher mentioned the fact that you have to take existing technology, like this right infrastructure, like right here, and somehow mend it together with these new superconducting electronics ideas. I think that's a very important thing to reflect on, though a lot of the agencies don't agree with that or funding such things. So we have to maybe make a stronger case there. The other issue that came up was helium shortage, and everyone is worried about that. Not worried about it from the point of view of cost mainly, and also just the fact that it's such a precious resource, and helium is so valuable to the superconducting industry. And there's some very good suggestions about how to conserve and how government can play a role in that conservation. An interesting comment by Carl Rosner in that panel was the fact that it's so important to develop products that are not economical, because they never are when you start. Once you get them working, then you can start chiseling away on the cost. And he knows what he's talking about. He's done it. I thought that was very important. We also mentioned the fact that how do all these electronics, could they fit in, superconducting electronics, particularly done by Hypers and IBM? Well, we have some of us has a vision of the data center of the future, and basically that their data centers are so massive and so important to our society. If they disappeared today, we'd all starve to death, because you can't even buy things without the internet. And so I think that's going to happen. It's going to have to happen in the future. And importantly, to get any of these things off the ground is the need for integration. And integration by nature is a collaborative process. Standards have to be set, people have to kind of work together. This afternoon in panel 3, we heard talks about the future of HTS and how it would fit into medicine, and what can be done there, and what's going on in the MRI world. And I guess the message that we got there was that the MRI industry is pretty mature. The markets are saturated, so it's difficult for the MRI guys to get R&D money, which is sort of surprising. But it's not surprising. It's the nature of the market. In one area which I thought was very interesting and helpful was the fact that HTS is going to play an important role in NMR, medical NMR, going to the higher frequencies, 1.3, 1.5 gigahertz. Now that sounds like a lab thing, but believe me, a lot of our chemistry has come out of NMR. A lot of fine chemistry, understanding of chemistry, and products from that has come. This is a very important development, I thought. There were some discussions about the bad parts of government regulation in terms of restricting some of the products that we have. I had suggested that maybe the power could be regulated and spawn some innovation. I think there's both parts of that. It can be good and bad, but I think it does play an important role. It shouldn't be neglected. Maybe both on encouraging them not to regulate certain things and encourage regulations of other things. The other part of this was, the importance of cryo-free systems, and that has to go back to the need of helium, and the role that refrigeration plays, an important role here. And the better we can do that, the further ahead this will get. So any encouragement in cryo-free systems, I think, is very important going downstream. The other things that were said were, that there was I guess, a surprising interest to me, coming from the background I do, that the larger companies seemed so interested in collaboration, or at least some interest in collaboration. And I thought that was very, very valuable, because historically that's very difficult to happen. But we're standing right here in Sematech, and that's one of the most collaborative things that people have put together on a very massive scale. So I think that perhaps with respect to MRI and superconductivity, that's something that could be then we had a very nice discussion about, the future and the pipeline of workers that, is coming downstream, and how we educate them, how we inspire them, what are the facilities to do that, and the discussions about how do we assess education or educators. And these topics are very important. They're all linked together because we need these people as we go forward. There was this thing called unintended consequences, which was discussed, and I think it's a very good way of describing a lot of things that happen with respect to policy. That's what makes policy setting very difficult, for the unintended consequences. So that's all I have, and if there are any comments you'd like to make, please. We take a few comments now, maybe a couple. Anybody have any comments about the meeting? Yes?
I think one of the biggest objectives of this particular summit, this is the third one, and each been different, and it continues to get better. But I walk away from this one feeling like we actually are a superconductor industry now in New York State. And we've talked about it, but I saw people at this one thinking like that. And the collaboration it's clear that everybody's come to the conclusion that as an industry, we have to collaborate among ourselves in order to promote the use of superconductivity in all its applications. That as standalone companies, we can't usually do it just by ourselves. And since we're largely a collection of, even within the large corporations, smaller groups and specialized groups, I think it's going to be very key. So I was very encouraged. By the way, I thought the video was outstanding. And if there's one thing, I think of 100 people and I keep with me. But if there's anything that really pulled it together, it really showed just how big the industry is here in New York State.
Thank you, Dick. Any other comments? Well, finally, I'd like to, Jack?
I'd just like to, I'm a professor at RPI, and I'd just like to speak to the issue of assessments and the distortion sometimes we just cause. I will say that as a high school student, I was bused, we had busing, into the inner city in Bridgeport, Connecticut, to the oldest high school, which was Warren Hardy. That'll give you some idea of the age of the school. But I had some of the best teachers I've ever had, even going on to MIT, right there in that high school. They loved what they were teaching. I think that's more important than all the assessments and all the other folly-rol that we're spinning up about statistics and spreads and all this stuff. Yeah, it's probably worthwhile looking at that. But if you lack the enthusiasm of the teachers because they're being pushed around or maybe made to teach something they don't love to teach, then you're going to miss the whole point. The teacher who loves what he's teaching is going to convey that feeling to his students. They're going to embrace that because they can feel that affection that person has for that topic, whether it's geometry, or physics, or chemistry. The other comment is that was a really poor high school in the worst part of town. And half of the people that I had for high school teachers eventually had PhDs themselves. Now, they may have been from local colleges, but they were allowed to evolve and improve throughout their whole career. And I don't see that happening today. Those are some thoughts from somebody who
Well stated.
really good high school education.
Well stated. Thank you. On behalf of the committee, the New York State Superconducting Committee, I'd like to thank and express our appreciation for your attendance and participation here today. We'd also like to acknowledge NYSERDA, especially Frank Murray and John Love, whose vision has been always unwavering and whose support made this meeting happen. We'd also like to thank Pradeep and Emily and Ashley for hosting the event. They did a magnificent job. Meetings like this are where new ideas are born. As Pradeep and Jim Bray pointed out, there is an intrinsic value in collaboration which extends beyond that what is achieved in the vacuum of isolated activities. Pradeep and Calieros have clearly demonstrated on a major scale what can be done with the proper industry, academic, university collaboration, especially with enlightened government. Our hope is that those who hear this message presented form a realistic view of where superconductivity stands today, where it can go, and why it should be supported. It's perfectly clear that New York is a major player in this area. Superconductivity represents a bright light in the difficult economic times. It will continue to glow with the proper nurturing. For few technologies, one can imagine, have more impact on future generations than superconductivity. We hope you enjoyed this event and wonderful